Our growth came about because we had really good leadership, and they needed opportunity.
Jack Herschend has served as chairman, president, and CEO of Herschend Family Entertainment and its portfolio of theme parks, resorts, and aquariums. Today, Herschend Family Entertainment and its parent company, Herschend Enterprises, are considered the nation's largest family-owned themed attraction corporation in the U.S. Their team of more than 11,000 employees creates, develops, and operates entertainment, tourism, and hospitality properties that currently span 26 locations across the U.S. and British Columbia. Herschend's roots date back to 1950 when the Herschend family founded their first attraction, a small cave tour in Branson, Missouri, which later expanded into the famed Silver Dollar City. Operating companies within the Herschend Family Entertainment include Dollywood Parks Resorts, Silver Dollar City Attractions, the Harlem Globetrotters, Adventure Aquarium, Newport Aquarium, Kentucky Kingdom, the Vancouver Aquarium, and Wild Adventures. Jack's intensity and deep caring for people shaped the company culture into what it is today. Jack attended Northwestern University as a wrestler and served as a lieutenant in the Marine Corps before returning home to focus on the family business. He has a deep passion for personal service and giving and has actively served several Christian ministries, including Lives Under Construction Boys Ranch, Kids Across America, and the National Institute of Marriage. In 1992, Jack founded The Gift of Green, which has planted nearly 200,000 trees to counter deforestation due to the development in the Missouri Ozarks. On the show, he shares his story, the growth of Herschend Family Entertainment, building a business, leadership, encouragement, failures, family, faith, marriage, and much more. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome to the Building Excellence Podcast. Today I have a special guest, Jack Herschend. Jack, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for coming clear over from Tulsa to be here.
Well, happy to do it, and I appreciate you taking some time to come with us on the podcast. And kind of before we dive into maybe your business story, we'd love to hear a little bit of your background and what life was like growing up for you.
Grew up in the Chicago area, one of the least friendly places in the United States, I think, but offered great education. So I'm grateful to the folks in the Chicago area for good education. In grade school and high school and Northwestern University. My parents divorced when I was 2, and my dad was an alcoholic, never held a job, and I'm a product of some of that. The fact that he never held a job caused me to want to prove that I could be successful, and I think his influence had a big influence on my business career. My mother remarried when I was 8 and married a Dane who had a son 2 years younger than myself, and he gave me the love that I needed, and I'm deeply grateful to Hugo for the love that he provided a boy who desperately needed it. And he was a wildflower lover and loved trees, and so we would go out and every weekend we'd be out in the woods, and he was teaching Pete and myself the names of all the trees and shrubs and flowers. Very grateful. And then we spent our summers on a farm in central Illinois, and that was another great growing up experience for my brother Pete and myself. So after Northwestern, after graduating from Northwestern, I went to the Marine Corps, and I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, and then I loved the Marine Corps. I would have stayed in the Marine Corps had I not felt an obligation to my family, who had leased a cave in Missouri by then, in Marvel Cave. And so my new bride, Sherry, we came back to the Ozarks to manage the family business, and so that's what took me away from the Marine Corps. I loved the Marine Corps because everything was ordered. There was no surprises. They had prioritized everything. Everything was black and white, and I loved that in that environment. But the family business was calling.
Sure. And before we kind of dive into that, I think before you went to Northwestern, were you still working at the family cave? Had you guys just acquired that before you got to college?
Yes. Yeah.
But you always wanted to go to college, is that correct?
No. Hugo had leased a cave and then paid the Lencesters, two old maids that owned the cave, the gross amount that they were taking in. So right off the bat, we were losing money. And my dad was a vacuum cleaner salesman in Chicago, and he had to supplement the business. And so when I got out of high school, I said, Dad, I need to be at the cave because I can, if I cut the cedar trees and I paint the highway signs, I can put up a highway sign, 8 by 16 foot highway sign for $18.75. I can't afford to go to college. And he had not gone to college, and he wanted his boys to go to college in the worst way. And he was very, very clever about it. He said, okay, I'll if you don't want to go to college, I'll give you a job. So my job, beside painting highway signs, was to carry sacks of cement down 505 feet. That's 50 stories worth of stairs. And we were pouring concrete, replacing wooden steps that rotted out every 2 years with concrete. And after 6 months of carrying sacks of cement, I saw the reason why I ought to go to college. So he won out, but pretty clever of him as to how he got me to go to college.
Absolutely. And also, too, I think you were a wrestler growing up in high school, and you wound up getting in the military. Was it part of wrestling connected to that?
I was a wrestler in high school, took second place in state of Illinois wrestling, and then I went on to be Big Ten wrestling champion for Northwestern. So wrestling taught me a lot, and was very, very good for a young man whose self-esteem wasn't very high. So I'm grateful to my wrestling coaches for guiding me through that experience.
Yeah, and did they help you get into the military too, and the Marines?
They did, and I love coaches. Christian coaches have the most awesome opportunity to impact boys, because we admire our coaches to begin with. And so one day, Jack Riley, my coach, said, "Gentlemen, tomorrow you all are going down to join the Marine Corps." And to a man, every one of us went down and signed up to be in the Marine Corps. To my knowledge, most of us never said anything to our parents. We just, if the coach said, you're supposed to go join the Marine Corps, then that's what you did. But when you think about when you, who talk to lots and lots of folks, listen to the impact that coaches had on young men. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I know I've been impacted by many of the coaches that I've had, and we all have had coaches, and the influence that you can have, positive or negative, is tremendous. So how you use that is really important.
Well said.
But going back into your story, obviously you're in the Marines, you love the Marines, and now you're going back to the cave. What did that look like after being in the Marines for a while and now stepping back into the family business?
Well, it looked high risk.
Okay.
We had a cave, as I mentioned, that it was 500 feet deep, and so the cave tour was limiting in terms of who could go on the tour. If you had babes in arms, you probably wouldn't want to climb 50 stories worth of steps to get out of the cave. Yeah. Or if you have some heart problems, you couldn't go. So we had to solve the problem of a 500. Most caves are horizontal. Mm-hmm. This one was vertical, and so we had to solve that problem. And so we ended up digging a tunnel 256 feet long through solid rock, and developing another a quarter of a mile of cave, and putting in a funicular cave train, and thus solving the problem. But if solving the problem of the steps, but had we missed our survey and dug a tunnel 256 feet long, and there wasn't a cave on the end, I'd have been back in Chicago selling vacuum cleaners. So it was a high risk deal. But it did pan out and in 1958 we opened the cable train, and our cave business jumped 40%. So after 7 years of losing money, we finally were in the black.
Yeah, tremendous risk with that, but at the same time, figuring
high
out
reward.
Finding a way to do it, I think, is also important. Figuring out being surrounded by good people. But also, maybe talk a little bit about the inception of Silver Dollar City from the cave, and how did that come about?
We were at the cave 3 years when we discovered that there'd been an old town at the entrance of Marble Cave, and 10 men from Lamar, Missouri, bought the cave thinking that they would make a fortune in mining marble. Carthage, not just 40 miles away, is famous for its beautiful Carthage marble. And there is marble in Marble Cave, but they found that it was worthless commercially because it had layers of flint running through it, so it had no value. And then they tried to mine lead and silver without success, but they discovered that there was tons and tons and tons of bat guano in the cave. And back in the 1880s, we had not learned how to make nitrogen synthetically. So the fertilizer, the only way you could get fertilizer was animal droppings. And so bird droppings and bat droppings were worth, in the 1880s, $700 a ton. Wow. Now that's kind of like a ton of feathers because it's really light. But nevertheless, they did very, very well for about 10 years. So we discovered that there'd been this old town. And when Sherry and I were in the Marine Corps, we visited Knott's Berry Farm, and we said, we ought to think about rebuilding that old town. And excuse me, much to our surprise, when Silver Dollar City opened in 1960, 4 times more people came to Silver Dollar City than had ever come to Marble Cave. So we scratched our head and said, we must be in the theme park business. We like people to think we were so smart ahead. We had planned all that out, but the Lord had that in mind.
Well, and talking a little bit about that, talking about vision, maybe what was your vision at the time for Silver Dollar City and starting that? What did you see? Because I know you can elaborate on what all you guys have done today, and I know that was in your mind all the time.
Yes, and our 200-year plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We really thought that Silver Dollar City would be a something for folks to do while they waited to go in the cave. So it was, we couldn't have been more wrong than we were, because the tail wagged the dog. Silver Dollar City really became the reason people came to see us.
Yeah. And when you started to maybe see that success in the industry that you're in, theme parks and obviously the cave as well, what was your mentality of starting to see things take shape and then being able to kind of grow and kind of expand and get more theme parks and do more things and build rides and all these things? What was your mentality, and how did you maybe start to go after that with the group of people that were in leadership at the time?
Everything happened slowly. I think the Lord tends to lead us one little piece at a time. I never had a long-range plan. I thought that I had a 4 or 5 year plan, but it changed every year. We just had new experiences, and those new experiences opened more opportunities for us. And so really feel like we were God-led, not human-led.
Yes.
in our career.
And going into that, I remember you grew up in your family. There wasn't necessarily faith, I think, at the time. How did you come to faith in Christ, and how did that kind of shape you and the way you thought about your business and growing it?
Growing up in Chicago, I never heard the name Jesus once.
Really? Wow.
So at 17-year-old, I came to the Ozarks, never having heard. Isn't that amazing?
That is pretty amazing.
Never having heard the name
Wow.
Jesus. And there was a Christian culture in the Ozarks, and I so admired the people that had faith, and I knew nothing about it, so I was hungry to learn more about it. And the month that we opened Silver Dollar City, both my brother and I accepted Christ in different circumstances, but after a few months it became obvious that we had a bear by the tail. This was a much bigger business than we ever dreamed it was going to be. And so we had what we called our board meeting. We met out on a log behind the Wilderness Church to figure out how we could be pleasing, how we could use Silver Dollar City to be pleasing to the Lord. And then he just guided the next step and the next step and the next step.
Yes, and talking about those steps, have you always been someone, whenever you came to faith, of being able to be obedient and trust whenever you feel like God's called you to do something? Have you always been good at taking that next step when you feel led? Or is that something that's grown over time?
I think I was mediocre. I think having my wife is a very strong believer, and Pete having a wife as a very strong believer, our wives had a big impact on our faith journey through our business, and that was a big impact. When we got to understand more of what we could do that would be pleasing to the Lord, the Silver Dollar City family influenced a Christian culture that became our strongest asset, stronger asset than a cave or a roller coaster. It was what set us apart. It was what frankly drew people who we needed to work at Silver Dollar City to come join us. So 1 Corinthians 13 became our culture. We're going to treat each other with patience, and we're going to be kind to each other, and we're going to be forgiving, and we're going to be humble. the seven in parts of 1 Corinthians 13, and that has become our culture throughout our company, and I'm really, really grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm glad you elaborate on that, because that's kind of the next question I was going to ask in my mind, is just the values that you try to instill within the culture of the organization. Because as you grow, it becomes more and more important to establish those values, because that is what's basically transformational, are the people that are baking the bread, that are, working on the rides. Those are the interactions that the people that go to those experiences have, and so that's really important as you establish that.
And those folks that you speak of, the men and women making the bread, what I find is a paycheck is important, of course, but they want to work at a place where they can make a difference, a worthwhile difference in the lives of other people. That's a hidden need, I think, that's in all of us. We want to be servants. We want to feel we're doing something that has value to other people. We want to be good servants.
Yeah. And I think one thing I've heard about you is that you like to go out and about and meet everyone that works at Silver Dollar City. How important is doing that and just being present? You talked about the values that you want to instill, but why is that important, just to go out and meet people and know people face to face and their names?
Well, there's a tremendous value, I think, both to the employee working on the front line and him getting to know the boss, but there's a greater value in the boss getting to know that frontline worker, because 90% of all of the information you need to run a successful business is known by that frontline worker, not by the boss. He meets the guests. I don't. And so the value of me getting a chance to listen to the folks that make up the family, is tremendous learning can happen. And without that, the leader is handicapped.
And, with your business, your brother is also a part of it. And so together, it's a family business.
Yes.
And how have you guys gone about effectively doing that? Because what you guys have done as two brothers to expand and do all the things you guys have done together is pretty amazing. And I think many families and brothers would be very envious of that, to be able to do it so well. How have you guys maintained a great relationship through all that?
For us, I think it was easy because Pete's giftedness was so crystal clear. Like his dad, he is a marketer through and through. He loves to sell things.
Okay.
And he's very, very good at it. So it became obvious very early, saying, Jack, you're the detail guy. Why don't you run the business? Pete will get our guests to come to the park, and you take care of them after they get there.
Okay.
And it was just super clear. It also helped for us to have a plan on how we would handle a disagreement before we had this disagreement. We said, when we have a disagreement, it's inevitable. We will take it to our board of directors for men, none with theme park experience, but just lots of business experience, Christian men who would make the decision. So we would disguise who wanted to go left and who wanted to go right, and we just listened to our board, and we agreed in advance. Whatever they said, we're going to get behind 100%. And it only needed to be done a half dozen times in our whole career, but having that plan already in place, I think I know served us very well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and example of being able to have a board, to have that intentionality already built in advance. So when those situations do occur, because not everything is going to go perfectly, you have that in advance, and you have surrounded yourself with wise counsel and wise people around you to help you make good decisions, which I think is pretty important.
We actually went one step further than that. As our business grew, it became obvious to Pete and myself that the size of the mistakes we could make got bigger annually.
Sure.
And we said, let's hire 4 outside businessmen who really cared about our success, and they'll outnumber us 4-2, and whatever the board says. So we actually gave up the ultimate control that the board has, and we've talked to a lot of family businesses. Very few will be willing to give up control. But it served us extremely well. When we have thought the board made a terrible mistake and didn't let us do what we wanted to do, it proved over time that they were right and we were wrong.
Well, going into that a little bit, I'd love to hear how you think about making good decisions. Like when you think about decisions that need to be made, how do you go about making good decisions?
The best decisions are collaborative, and having the input from many adds immeasurably to the chance that you're going to make the right decision. So we have always practiced getting our leadership team together and listening very carefully to everybody's point. In if it was the CEO's decision to make, then I would make it after getting good counsel from everybody who had experience with the business and had an opinion. Sometimes it was the board of directors, and I would take our recommendation to the board, and they would make a decision. But listening to the thoughts, and time after time after time, as we would discuss it, what started out in the minority would end up being the right direction. But you had to listen really careful, because they were clearly in the minority, and it's easy to say, well, 8 out of 10 of us think we ought to go this direction.
Sure.
So let's do it. But we need to listen a while longer just to be sure we understood what the minority was saying.
Yeah, I think the importance of being able to listen, but also too, I've heard you guys touch on, obviously growing your businesses, you put in blood, sweat, tears, but also there was a fourth thing that I heard that I thought was really impactful, was prayer. How important has prayer been when you make decisions, but also in life in general for you?
Well, obviously, in seeking God's direction is a huge, huge part, and oftentimes we changed the direction because it became clear that this was not what God was going to bless. That brings up a point that was a big mistake that I made early on. I had 12 people reporting to me, and not all of them were believers. We spent an inordinate amount of time trying to convince a non-believer that spending money, for instance, for staff, that we didn't need, they thought we didn't need to spend, but it was just the right thing to do. That's hard to justify to somebody who's not a believer. And so if I had it to do over again, while within the organization, I think we should hire the best people, whether they're believers or not. But for the leadership team, everybody ought to be a believer to make things run more smoothly.
Yeah, just creates an alignment of where you guys are going, and everyone's kind of on the same page.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, kind of going in, obviously, Silver City's growing, and you talked about taking step by step by step, and it was a slow growth. But how did things such as like Dollywood, how did that come to fruition? And were you always, when things started progressing, did you always think about going to East Tennessee and doing what you guys have done over there? And maybe talk about how that happened.
Well, I think our growth came about because we had really good leadership, and they needed opportunity. And it was, Pete and I believe, that our responsibility was to supply the needs of our team, and we needed to provide that opportunity for them to grow. So that was a big driver for us as we went forward. There was a big temptation to stay at Silver Dollar City and just do it better and better and better. And there's a part of me that kind of wishes we had done that. And that would have been fun. But we needed to provide that opportunity. So the first growth came when we had an oil embargo in 1973, and Congress said we've got to save gasoline and conserve gasoline, so we're not going to allow gas to be sold on weekends. Well, we're a long way from Tulsa, and we're a longer way from Kansas City and Oklahoma City and St. Louis and Chicago, etc. And so we decided we needed to go in business closer to metro centers, and we got into the water park business, and we built 5 water parks. Had a lot of fun doing that, that was our first venture out past Marvel Cave and Silver Dollar City, and then after that, just it felt like we ought to do Silver Dollar City again, and we hired a firm to recommend to us where we should put it, and they said it ought to be in Brown County, Indiana. Well, I visited Brown County, and I thought, no. So I said, give me another recommendation. And they said, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You guys fit perfectly there. So I went to Lancaster, and this is just letting you know about me, but I'm a Midwesterner, and people on the East Coast, they think funny, and they don't, and Christian values is not something they're real high on. I thought, no. So we ended up being in the Smoky Mountains, and that was a blessing. So we built Silver Dollar City, Tennessee there, and then 10 years later we got the opportunity to partner with Dolly Parton, and she has been an unbelievable partner. And now Dollywood is about a third larger than Silver Dollar City.
Yeah, well, I think too the progression of your business and how you guys continually took one step and grew and surround yourself with great people, I think is really important. But then also being prayerful, working from biblical values, and having your faith guide you as well. And obviously, too, for people that maybe don't know, you guys also acquired the Harlem Globetrotters. How did that come about? Because maybe for people listening, that's not necessarily a theme park, but how did that kind of pop into the business?
After we purchased the Harlem Globetrotters, I had at least 30 people say, Jack, what were you thinking? But we're really in the family entertainment business, and the Harlem Globetrotters do a great job of that. It occurred to us after we tried to build businesses that were in trouble and try to turn them around. That was really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
That we ought to be looking at business opportunities to purchase businesses that were successful. We'd pay more for them, but we wouldn't have that turnaround problem. And so Harlem Globetrotters was one of the first that fit into that category. And what a joy that has been. The men and now women that make up the Harlem Globetrotters, their culture was a strong Christian culture before we ever. Interesting that their founder was a Jewish man from the Bronx, but the majority of the players had a youth ministry back in their hometowns. And so it's just been a joy to just stand back and support them in doing what they do, because they already had their heart in the right place.
Yes, and I think when you share all these stories too, there's obviously alignment with the mission of what you guys are doing, but as well as you're in the entertainment business of being able to provide experiences for families. We were talking before off air and just how the people in this room have been impacted by coming to Silverado City with their family or whatever experience that they have in their mind when they're little, they're older, it doesn't matter. And so you guys have the ability to do that. How important has creativity been in being able to provide new attractions, think of new things to provide new experiences for people, and how have you guys gone about doing that effectively?
Because Walt Disney had a group of Imagineers that did a fantastic job for Disney, and we didn't have that. But we found that we could identify highly creative people, some in leadership, but I remember a highly creative guy who was a plumber and a highly creative guy who was a cave guide. And so we would just gather the highly creative people together and say, this is our challenge, and then shut up and listen. And the process is so really a lot of fun. The leader's responsibility is just to provide the right questions and the right clarity on the objective, and then let the creative people do their thing. And that we have been blessed with some very creative people at all levels in our business.
Yeah, and being creative means there's probably not always going to have everything go according to plan or the way it should go. How important has failure been in being able to take risk? Like you talked about before, it was a good risk for you guys to do what you did. But have there been risks that you took that maybe didn't pan out, and what did you learn from those things?
Well, of course, as everybody knows, you learn a lot more from your failures than you do your successes.
Hopefully, right? Yeah.
And Silver Dollar City, Tennessee, was one of those failures. We thought we would go into a bigger market than Ozark Mountain Country and be among people who actually their ancestors settled the Ozarks, so the where they came from, same. Yeah. It just seemed like Silver Dollar City, Missouri, could be replicated there, and we found that's not to be true. Much more conservative. I remember standing up in front of the team, the entire team at Silver Dollar City, Tennessee, and saying, we're going to be Dollywood next year, and we've got 110 jobs this winter. And people saying, you mean you want us to work this winter rather than draw our due? Meaning we deserve the winter off, and the federal government will pay us for it.
Yeah.
So we learned a lot about our failures throughout Silver Dollar City, Tennessee, but that was corrected by finding the right local gal who was loved by everybody, and suddenly the whole culture changed.
Yeah, and those are great stories behind that, and I wish we had more time, but when we start winding down here to honor your time, real quickly, we're in your office right now, and there's so many pictures of people that are important in your life. How important has family been? And I would love to hear your perspective on what it means to be a good husband and father, because you've been married for, I believe, 70 plus years. What has that meant to you, and how have you guys had a great marriage?
Well, first of all, I would attribute the great marriage to my wife. I was a workaholic. Remember back in my dad never holding a job, and so I spent my career being a 7-day-a-week workaholic. And I fell into the lie that it wasn't the quantity of time that you spent that was important, that you spend with your family. It was the quality. So I was my boys' scoutmaster. I was their Sunday school teacher. I was the adventure planner and canoe trip planner, etc. But I wasn't around a lot. And so I would count myself really as a failure in terms of providing what a good Christian father should provide. Later on, and as a grandparent, I realized it was not the quantity of quality of time, it was both. It was quality and quantity were what my family deserved.
Yeah.
And so that's my biggest regret.
Yeah. And, as you're sitting there talking, I just have a question for you in terms of, there's a tension of wanting to be a good dad, but if you're driven and ambitious like you are to be successful in your business, how would you advise people to manage that tension of being ambitious but wanting to be a great husband and father and family person, but still wanting to be great in your work as well?
Set objectives. Particularly set your objectives with your spouse. So now we've got a business objective, and we've got a family objective. We've got a husband and wife couple objective. And now we're going to build our plan to accomplish the objectives in all three categories. In our business, we have three objectives. And one is to be pleasing to the Lord. The second is to be a great place to work for great people. Third, we're going to get a fair return on our investment. But all three are equally important. There's no priority there. All three have to be met. The same thing in the family.
Yeah.
All of the objectives, you and your wife, your objective, and then with the family, the kids, and then with the business. You can add another one for community. What do we want to accomplish as servants to our community? But then sit down, and it's hard work to plan out a plan where we're going to accomplish all 3 or 4 objectives, not just one.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to intentionality. You put that hard work in, but you're intentional about it. And so being able to see the future, you want to have a good family life, you want to have a good work life, and being able to be intentional about what you just talked about and having those objectives is really important. There's a story that I'd love for you to share as we start winding down about how you go about encouraging other people. You send notes and things like that, but also there's a story, I think, of a pigeon, teaching a pigeon that I've heard you share before that I think is a great story. If you wouldn't mind sharing what that is.
I'm in love with the opportunity to mentor. I had 3 great men who poured into me. They were available when I needed them to talk about my issues, and they just made a huge, huge difference. And for me, mentoring, if I could give young people a gift, it'd be have a Christian man or woman who genuinely cares about them, have lots of experience, but who are willing just to focus on what the mentee wants to talk about. What are the issues the mentee has? And this is important because many mentors want to wax eloquently about their successes, leaving the mentee with the job of trying to figure out what they're learning there that would apply to them, often 40 years younger. It's very hard. That's very hard. So the mentor should have the workload. He ought to be, or she ought to be, responsible to meet with the mentee and listen, and then see what, from their experience, they could suggest that the mentee try. The mentee makes all the decisions, but so the mentoring process is one that just, I think, has a great potential to impact young people as they get started in their lives.
And then maybe the idea of being able to teach or show people doing things what you want to see more of, and maybe share a little bit about that pigeon story of what that means and how that's
I
important.
went to Menninger Clinic in Topeka years ago to learn what psychologists had learned about motivation. And the instructor came in, didn't introduce himself, just opened with a question of how many of you feel you can teach a pigeon to bowl. And we didn't have a clue. And he said, well, it takes about 4 hours. He said, strikes and spares take a little longer, but he said, if any time the pigeon looks at the ball, you reward him. Anytime he takes a step toward the ball, you reward him. Anytime he touches the ball, you reward him. Anytime he pushes the ball toward the pins, you reward him. In about 4 hours, he's bowling. Notice he had never criticized the pigeon. You only rewarded those things the pigeon did that were moving him toward the goal. And it changed my leadership style, because I thought my job was to go from property to property and find problems that needed to be solved. I was insulting the leader there. He already knew 95% of the issues that needed to be solved. My job was to find out what's going right and recognize it and appreciate it. We had a CEO, Joel Manby, who wrote a great book called Love Works, and from which our Christian culture, coming out of 1 Corinthians 13, where it comes from. But Joel said he would start his speeches by saying, by a show of hands, how many of y'all feel overly appreciated? And of course, everybody would laugh and no hands would go up, proving his point that we all have a hunger to be appreciated, and it's insatiable. It just goes on and on and on. So I think the leader's job is to recognize what that pigeon needed and be sure we're identifying those things that are going right. And as I say, it changed my leadership style, and I think I was much more effective in appreciating things that were going right and getting more of that than trying to correct.
Yeah, and a powerful story in leadership with your business, in parenting, all these things are applicable with that story, I think, and I'm glad you shared that. real quickly, we've got a little fire round, so I'm going to say a sentence, and you can finish with whatever comes to your mind first in a word or sentence, however you feel led. Stewardship means.
Stewardship, to me, means being a servant. I know the first thought has to do with financials, but the more valuable is what we actually do in serving people. It can be an appreciation, but it can be in all kinds of different needs that our friends and colleagues need. And so
Well said.
we want to be a servant.
Yeah. Favorite cave spot?
Cave spot.
Yep.
Standing at the top of the cathedral room, looking down into 400 feet of darkness, and just thinking about what that cave did for me and my family.
Well said. Humility means.
Humility, first of all, is very attractive. We all love being around humble people. Humility to me means that we think more of others than we think of ourselves.
Well said. Do you have a favorite book?
I gave you a copy. Joe White, who is a model of a Christian leader, wrote a book on Christian leadership that I think is pretty special.
Absolutely. Well, we're done with the fire round. The final question I have for you, this podcast is called Building Excellence. What does building excellence mean to you?
I think building excellence to me is first putting in place that identification of your vision. For us, we want to serve, we feel we serve the Lord best by bringing families closer together. And secondly, having a mission that is broadly understood and bought into, we create memories worth repeating. And then identification of the culture you want to, how do you want to treat each other? And having that in writing and clear and communicated often. Within that environment, maybe add also, what are your long-term objectives? No more than 3 or 4, so that everybody can remember them. Having all that in place, excellence is the pursuit of those things.
Yeah. Well, Jack, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing your story and all these lessons that you've learned. You're a great example of someone who builds excellence and has done that within their family, their work, and the people that are around, and the memories that you guys help create for families is incredible. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story.
You're an awesome leader. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Building Excellence podcast. If you found value today, we would really appreciate it if you shared the show and left a rating and review. Also, be sure to follow us on all podcasts and social media platforms, as well as YouTube, where you can watch full episodes. To learn more about the podcast or any coaching and speaking, check out baileymiles.com. Thanks again, and now go work to build excellence in your life, leadership, and legacy.